So you want to start Western hunting. This is the first episode in a series of podcasts that I'm doing all about Western hunting. I intend on covering everything from the mindset, the physical fitness, budgeting, understanding the points and draw systems, everything that you need to know to get started on your Western hunting journey. I have one more thing that I think might be a little controversial. And I should say, welcome to the Endure Hunt podcast. This is your first time listening. I am Angela Kosovic. I am your host. I started hunting in 2018 after I got out of the Marines, and I have been hooked ever since. My first hunt was in Montana on a mule deer elk combination tag, and since then I've hunted 6 different states. I started this podcast to share my journey, share the things that I've learned along the way, and try and encourage more people to start hunting. Over the last year that I've done this, I realized that the thing that I'm really good at is breaking down Western hunting, the point systems, and just getting after it. And my hope with this series that I'm kicking off on this episode is that I will be able to lay the foundation to help people figure out how they want to get started with Western hunting. That is my hope. So, if that sounds like you, throughout this episode, I'm going to go over 4 different approaches that I want you to consider as you begin planning your Western hunting journey. So, without further ado, let's just dive right in. When you're first planning and figuring out how you want to get started with Western hunting, I want you to consider the state and species that you're going to target first. When you're first getting started, it's easy to be overwhelmed by all of the options. So many different states have so many different things you can do. Every state has its own application season, their own complications, and it's easy to be overwhelmed and just not start at all. My first Western hunt, I didn't get to pick the tag. I didn't get to pick the species. I was deployed overseas. My best friend Peter's wife went through an outfitter to get him a tag for a DIY mule deer and elk combination hunt in southwestern Montana, and he didn't want to go alone and asked me to join. Neither of us had gone on a Western hunt before. I had never hunted ever. And that took one of the decisions out for us. We had no choice but to do that because the state and the species were picked. So for us, it was easy to just start planning. So I have 2 general thoughts on this and I guess tips that you could take away. The first one is you just need to commit. Don't overthink it. Pick a state, a species, set a deadline. I have hunted Montana twice. Each time it is more than one day of driving. It is a pain, but you can do it. You can overcome the obstacle. Just pick a state, pick a species, set a deadline, commit to it, and just do it. The first hunt is the hardest. Get it under your belt. The second one, ironically, is that you need to try and reduce the friction points as much as possible. Now, I'm saying that because the situation for me was not ideal. Montana was about as far away from New Jersey as you can get. I mean, yes, Idaho and Washington State are further, but we were southwest Montana. We were almost in Idaho, basically. You don't want to start there, in my opinion. It's difficult and daunting. When I start planning after that hunt, like I only returned to Montana in 2023. Every other hunt that I had done, I tried to look at states that were closer to me. Now, I lived in Texas most of the time, and I'm not doing a Western hunt this year because I moved to Tennessee. But in general, I think that it makes the most sense in the beginning to start with the states that are closest to you. My recommendation is going to be pull up Go Hunt Maps, OnX Maps, or Google Maps, whatever you have available to you. Look at the states that surround yours. Which ones have the type of species that you want to target? Which ones have the hunt that you're hoping to do? Maybe your dream is chasing big bulls in Utah and Arizona, but if you live on the East Coast in Maryland or Virginia, maybe you shouldn't start there. I don't want you to overthink this. In the beginning, I don't want you to target your dream hunt. Even if you were to get that dream hunt, you're able to draw that tag, you're not going to be ready because you just simply haven't done enough repetitions or have enough experience under your belt to take full advantage of that opportunity. Even with a guide, there's a chance that you would blow it. So if you're just getting started, this is going to be your very first Western hunt. Do not overthink it. look at Google Maps or just pick a state that you know you can hunt. You can look at the over-the-counter states or whatever. What I want you to do is either pick the state that is closest to you that has what you want, even if it's not ideal, and just commit to it. Don't overthink it. Just pick it, get started. Or think about what your dream hunt is and try and get close. So what I mean by that is, right, like let's go back to the elk in Arizona or Utah. Maybe you want to chase big bulls. So start with a cow elk tag. You can get cow elk tags in a couple of states a lot easier than you can get a bull elk tag. I've got 5 points in Wyoming for a bull. And yes, there's always the chance, like I know that people draw it in 1 or 2 years, but you can get cow elk tags every year. And if you look in different states and do applications for them, if your goal is to hunt bull elk, you can apply for points while hunting cows, getting experience in elk country, getting exposure to them, and getting reps under your belt. That is the type of thing that's going to set you up for success, in my opinion. So to round out this first section, state and species, pick one state, one species, give yourself a deadline, commit to it so that you are forced to take action and move to the next step. All right, with your state and species picked, now let's talk over the counter versus drawn hunts. Obviously, not every state has over the counter hunts, but there are options out there. Depending on which state you picked, will determine what options you have. My personal preference is to go for drawn hunts. Keep in mind, I have been applying in a bunch of Western states for the last 6 years. Now, I didn't start applying for all of them all at once. Breaking down point building is going to be a completely separate podcast. I'll dedicate to it and talk about my strategy. But I'm personally at the point where I can draw a hunt in most states. When you're just starting out, that's not going to be the case. You don't have any points anywhere. The mindset that I want you to have is to just get started. You're not going to go on the perfect first hunt. You just need to go on a hunt. That being said, there are plenty of states where you can draw hunts with 0 points. There are, and I'm not going to disclose any units or any specific hunts or seasons, but Colorado and Montana both have options that you can draw with 0 points. There are other states too that you can draw a tag your first time applying. The advantage from my perspective of going for these drawn hunts, even if they don't take any points or 1 point, let's say, there will be less hunting pressure. Over the counter hunts are just that. Anyone can buy them. Even if there's a cap, that cap is going to be higher than it would if it were a drawn hunt. The other thing to consider is over the counter hunts are becoming more difficult to get. It looks like Colorado is getting rid of the over the counter archery elk hunt next year. And the Idaho system is, well, I'm going to say finally going to a draw because it basically hasn't been an over the counter system for the last 3 years. So it's getting harder and harder to do over the counter hunts. There are still over the counter hunts. Colorado's still going to have the rifle elk hunt. Arizona still has their over the counter Coues deer and mule deer archery hunts. You still have Utah archery elk and rifle elk general seasons. And it's incredibly easy to get those tags. You also have over the counter bear. So there's a lot of different options that you can do, but they are getting harder and harder. And those seasons are the ones where you're going to face the most hunting pressure. Depending on the state and the species you picked, look at your options for those states. See what you can do and go from there. I will say, again, your first hunt is not going to be your ideal hunt. My first Western hunt was Western Montana, right? I didn't pick that. The first hunt that we picked was a rifle over the counter elk hunt in Utah. Utah does not have a great reputation, and that's okay. I've now hunted Utah twice over the counter for elk, and I've seen elk both times. I've had opportunities both times. I screwed up. But the point is, people find success in every hunt every year. It's possible in less than ideal circumstances, and you'll never find success if you don't go on that first hunt. So the whole point behind this podcast is I'm just trying to get you to Make decisions that will allow you to execute and get moving forward. Whether you choose to do draw or over the counter doesn't really matter. You need a tag in your pocket and you need the mindset to make it happen. So pick your state, pick your species, and decide if you'd prefer to do a drawn hunt or an over the counter hunt. If you don't care, it makes it more flexible. My preference is always to do drawn hunts. I'd like to put the odds in my favor, but you can find success either way. We have to figure out the season that you want to hunt and the method of take that you're going to use. So I just recently did a breakdown of the various methods of take in episode 32 of the podcast. I'm going to link it in the show notes, and if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the card, wherever the card is on the screen. So I'll refer that to you. But these two go hand in hand. Depending on the method of take you want is going to determine the season that you are eligible to hunt. Now that you have your species and state locked in, this is the next logical step for you to look at. There are two different ways that you can approach this, generally speaking. You can either start with the method of take or start with the season that you want to hunt. What I mean by that is if you know you want to bow hunt, well, that makes it easy for you. Those season dates are going to be set. The other way you can approach this is by knowing what dates you want to hunt first. Every once in a while, when I plan a hunt, I start with the dates first, where I know this is the time window that I have to hunt this year. What are the seasons that I can hunt with those dates? Usually, there's not a lot of overlap. When Peter and I do most of our planning, we start generally with the method of take. So, for example, we might say, hey, I want to bow hunt this year. Like when we went to Utah in 2022, both of us wanted to bow hunt. The previous Utah elk hunt we did was with rifle. Based on the terrain and just the experience that we had, we wanted to start with a rifle to begin. But then after we had a couple hunts under our belts, you're like, I really want to do a bow hunt. I'd love to come and do a bow hunt, chase some bugles. So we approached it from that standpoint. Depending on the state and the species and the method of take that you want to do will also determine the dates that you can actually hunt. What I mean by that is when I drew my rifle bull elk tag in Arizona, that was I want to say a 6-day season. I only had a week basically. When we did our bow hunt for Utah elk, that whole season is about a month. Generally, I can only hunt for a week at a time. So at that point, you've just got to pick a set of dates and go with it. And let me tell you, the decision fatigue that Peter and I had planning that hunt was heavy. When you go down the rabbit hole of the elk rut, it is easy to get overwhelmed by, oh, do you want the pre-rut or do you want this? Like, which week is the best week for you to do to chase the bugles and get the bulls going? And then you don't actually know when the rut's going to happen and when is the peak of hunting pressure going to be. Ultimately, we picked a date that worked best for our work schedules that we thought was going to be okay. We committed to it and we made the most of the hunt. I'm going to come back to that concept multiple times throughout this podcast. Don't overthink it, commit, just get started. The other thing that I'm going to come back to multiple times in this podcast is trying to reduce the friction and make this as easy for you as possible. The reason that we often don't take action is because there's too many options and nothing's a priority. What I want you to do is set deadlines for yourself, make these decisions so that you don't have to think about it anymore. Once you have made a commitment to start, you just have to plan and execute. There's nothing else that needs to happen. So make this decision as easy as possible for yourself. You already know the state and the species that you want to do. Just think about what your hunting experience is. If you're only comfortable hunting with a rifle, hunt with a rifle. Use it. Don't be overwhelmed by the Orange Army. There are ways of using hunting pressure to your advantage and getting around people. You can get creative with that stuff. What you need to do is start hunting, though. If you really want to hunt with a bow, hunt with a bow. Just pick a date and go for it. The point I'm trying to get you to consider here is just pick and move on so you don't have to spend any more brain power on it. The last thing when it comes to method of take and season planning is that sometimes there are multiple seasons you can do. And this is when the planning can get a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to use Arizona as an example of this because I think they have a great breakdown of the different seasons. So you have your early archery, late archery, early rifle, late rifle. Those are the four different general categories. They do have muzzleloader hunts as well, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to talk about those two. Your early archery is your rut elk hunt. Your late archery is post rut. Your early rifle is sort of in the middle of the hunting season. And then your late rifle is a true post, like late season hunt. If you decide that you want to do archery, you have to pick early archery or late archery. That is an important decision because it will impact the plan, the way you execute the hunt. So the last thing I want you to consider for planning your Western hunt is the type of hunt you want to do. And I don't mean the species, I don't mean the method, I don't mean the season. What I mean is the way you're actually going to execute the hunt itself. And I have three general categories that I break this down into. So your first is going to be your backpack style hunt. This is where you carry everything in, you're spike camping, you're going into the woods, away from the trailhead or into the mountains, away from the trailhead, and you set up a base camp somewhere on public land and you hunt out from there. You hike everywhere you need to go. The second is base camp and day hunting. So this is where you will set up a base camp, usually at a trailhead or off of a trailhead, near a trailhead, and you camp by your vehicles, something to that effect. And you either day hunt by hiking out of that base camp or you drive to your hunting spots from your base camp. And then the last one is going to be staying at a hotel and doing day hunts from the hotel. Obviously, you would be driving from the hotel to the area that you're going to hunt every day and back. Each of those has their own benefits, and I've used all of them. For that first hunt in Montana, we stayed in a lodge. It wasn't a hotel and it wasn't very fancy, but it was a place to stay that kept us warm and away from the elements. This was a late season hunt in Montana. It was incredibly cold. The high was 15 degrees. We had snow on the ground the entire time. There, and to be honest, we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't have the skills or the equipment for us to do a backpack or even a base camp. This was the best option for us to get started. It cost more money because we had to pay to stay at the lodge. It was DIY, no guides, no anything like that. But we had their facilities that we were able to stay at and go back to every day. That helped us get started. That was the one that kicked us off. Since then, we have not stayed in a lodge or a hotel or anything like that. That's my least favorite method just because you are losing time to driving most of the time. Hotels and lodges are going to usually be farther from the actual hunting area. Now, I've stayed in hotels every time I've traveled. Usually, what we do is because Peter and I come from different locations, we will add days for travel, meet in a hotel in the town outside of the area we want to hunt, spend the night there, and then early in the morning, the first day that we plan on going, get in before dark, try and get to the parking area and start hiking in sun or like as the sun is coming up. That's generally the way that we approach it nowadays. But we haven't actually hunted from a hotel or a lodge since that first hunt. Now, you have to be honest with yourself, determine what your comfort level and what your skills are. What kind of gear do you have? And just pick one and figure it out. Like I said, I've done all three. You can do them. And just to give some more examples, so that first hunt in Montana was a lodge hunt with day hunts. Utah, the first time, actually both times, were backpack hunts where we backpacked in, spike camped, and then moved locations as we needed to. But everything we needed, we carried on our backs. Arizona was base camping and day hunting. The second time I did Arizona, or the second time I did Montana, was also a base camp style hunt. And Wyoming was the same thing when I went after pronghorn. It was a base camp style hunt. Used my truck tent, camped out of the truck tent. Every morning I packed up the truck tent and we drove somewhere and then day hunted out from those spots. You can do any of them. I love the backpack style, but it depends on the hunt. When you're new, mobility is a huge factor. And I think that the flexibility that you get from hunting out of a vehicle is great because you don't know what gear you need. And I am the first person that will bring too much gear. I still to this day will bring too much gear. The nice thing about doing a base camp hunt is you don't lose the commitment of backpacking into a place, spending, let's say you spend half a day hiking in, you're kind of stuck to that geographical area, that spot. If you day hunt and base camp, you can spend a day in one spot. If the species you're looking for is not there, you can just go back to your vehicle and move to another spot. That's harder when you spike camp in and backpack. So you've got to figure out your comfort level and the general approach you want. I think flexibility and mobility in the beginning is really helpful because you don't want to waste all of your time in a bad spot. So generally, I think for multiple reasons, the base camp and day hunt method is your best place to get started. You can bring extra gear because the stuff that you don't think you need that day, just leave it in your car, leave it at your base camp. It's easier on you physically because you don't necessarily need to carry a week's worth of stuff on your back, and you're not going to lose as much time as you would staying at a hotel. Now, if you don't have any camping gear and you have the funds to pay for a hotel and you don't mind driving, go for it. All I want you to do is pick one and start hunting. I have one more thing that I think might be a little controversial. At this point, we have covered a few different things. We've talked about the state and the species. We've talked about over the counter and drawn hunts. We've talked about method of take and seasons and the type of hunting you are going to do. And truth be told, when you're just getting started, that is all you need to consider. You don't have to overthink it. It is not that complicated. Pick a species and state, whether you want to do over the counter or draw, pick a weapon and a type of hunt you want to do. Congratulations, you have just narrowed down the whole, all of the options to a small select few things that you can do. Pick it, apply, and go for it. But have a potentially controversial idea that can help you get started. If you are overwhelmed by the idea of traveling for a day or 2 days and getting started with Western hunting, let's say you live in Maryland and the idea of driving to Idaho is extremely intimidating to you. I want you to consider this. Why don't you just try doing a deer hunt in another state? If you've never hunted outside of your home state or even your own state, and the idea of traveling several days with all of this gear is intimidating and potentially overwhelming. If you live in Maryland, go to Virginia. Do a deer hunt in Virginia. You are going to have to go through all of the same steps that I laid out for you to plan your Western hunt on a smaller scale, closer to home, much easier. You won't have to drive as far. Well, Virginia is a pretty big state, as the example that I gave, but you still won't have to drive as far. You will still have to figure out whether you want to do a base camp, put all of your stuff in your car, do a hotel, backpack hunt. All of the logistics and planning is going to be the same. Chances are you won't have to figure out over the counter versus draw. Maybe you will, depending on the state, but you are going to have to pick a season, a weapon. Every other step in this process that you have to do to plan a Western hunt can be done and mimicked at a smaller scale, closer to home. If you have concerns about your ability to execute the logistics and planning, maybe you start in your own state, just on a different part of the state, or you hunt the state that's right next to you. Now, this isn't going to actually get you that elk hunt or that mule deer hunt that you want, unless you live next to a state that has those. Which, hey, easier then. But this will help you get experience under your belt that will make it easier to take that next step. Everyone has big goals in life. You should. The thing is, you don't shoot for that big goal the first time around. You break down that goal into smaller chunks and you do each one a step at a time. If your ultimate goal is Western hunting for big bull elk, and I keep coming back to big bull elk because they're my favorite. I love chasing bull elk. That's my favorite species to hunt. If your goal is to hunt big bull elk, that first, you've got to get there and prepare yourself to be able to take advantage of it. You know, and that's the reason why when I did my Arizona hunt, I went with a guide because I had no experience with elk hunting. I didn't want to blow it. I don't know how long it's going to take me to draw an elk hunt in Arizona again. I wasn't ready because I didn't do a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about right now. I did have 2 other Western hunts under my belt, but I knew I wasn't ready. By doing as many hunts as possible beforehand, putting yourself in situations to get comfortable in the areas that you're going to be and the types of situations that you're going to be in when you're Western hunting is going to make it easier for you to execute when that time comes. So I want to kind of close this podcast out. The last thing I want you to consider is that the sooner you start, the better. The first hunt is going to be the most difficult for you to execute. You're going to make all of the mistakes. You are going to screw up everything you can screw up. You're going to forget some piece of gear. It's okay. The longer you delay, the harder it's going to get. The more you put off that first Western hunt, the more difficult it's going to be for you to convince yourself. Each year that goes by that you say, yeah, I'm going to do it this year, and then you don't, is going to reaffirm in your head that you're never going to do it. Even if it's an imperfect hunt, if you can go this year, you should. This year, if possible. If not, commit to next year. You've got to commit. You have to set a deadline, hold yourself to it, and just get started. In the beginning of this podcast, I mentioned I'm doing a whole series on Western hunting. And I think that is the general area that I want to be focusing this podcast on. I'm doing this series of podcasts and I am trying to put the information out there for you to take advantage of, for you to be able to execute this on your own. But if you need some help, I started doing some one-on-one consulting, helping people plan and figure out how to do their first hunt, how to get the rep under their belt so that they can actually just start doing it and pursue their dreams of Western hunting. And this sounds like you and you would like more assistance, some more dedicated help. I started doing one-on-one consulting to help hunters pursue their passion for Western hunting. If you would like to have a meeting with me and I can go through your background, the struggles that you're facing with, and talk about your specific problems and put together a plan to get you on your first Western hunt, click the link in my bio to join the waiting list. It is currently full right now. I have no open sessions, but I plan on opening it up every single month. So we're in the middle of June at this point. I am going to do another set of sessions in July, and ideally each month after that. Get on the waiting list now, and you'll get updates as soon as I am ready to take on some more one-on-one clients. You'll be notified as soon as the window is open to apply for a one-on-one session. All right, the last thing I'm going to say now is that your mindset matters the most in this. You could have the best tag in the world or the worst tag in the world. What's going to make it happen is you. We used to say in the Marines, the most important 6 inches on the battlefield is between your ears, and that is true in the hunting seasons as well. All right, if you made it to the end of this podcast, I just want to say how much I appreciate you. Time is our most valuable asset, and I do not take for granted that you chose to spend your precious time with me listening to this podcast. I hope that you benefited from it and got something from it. Thank you very much, and I'll see y'all next time.